Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Small Business Economics interview series. My name is Roberto Vivona. I am the social media editor for the journal, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Peter J. Buckley. Professor Buckley is Professor of International Business at the Alliance Manchester Business School and is one of the leading global authorities on multinational enterprises and international business. So we are thrilled to have him here to discuss his recent paper published in Small Business Economic Journal. Professor Buckley, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Today we will be discussing your article entitled Is Entrepreneurship in Secular Decline? Published in Small Business Economics on 29th of September 2025. For those watching, you can find the link to the paper in the description below. So, Professor Buckley, to start, could you please explain what you mean by secular decline in entrepreneurship and what observations or broader trends motivated you to explore this question?
Yes, I think I came at this subject from two different ways. One way was thinking about the theory of entrepreneurship. And the second way was from what you might call casual empiricism, talking to people, talking to entrepreneurs, generally observing the world around us and the business world and the difficulties that entrepreneurs face. And this was prompted by a request to give a talk at the McGill International Entrepreneurship Conference in Lappeenranta in Finland. And I thought I would take this opportunity to give a kind of challenging paper for the people who are interested in entrepreneurship. And in fact, it proved to be so. I spoke for half an hour and there was well over an hour of questions. And I think the basic idea of the paper is that the original title was The Golden Age of Entrepreneurship is Over, or The Golden Age of Entrepreneurship is Coming to an End, or words to that effect, which gives you the general drift. And the idea was that if we look at both the supply side of entrepreneurship and the demand side, then we observe real problems in, as I perceive it, in the world. On the supply side, I think there's a diminishing supply of people willing to perform the entrepreneurship function. Other pursuits are valued more than entrepreneurship is, leisure and cultural activities perhaps more than entrepreneurship. And I'm going to argue that also there's pressure from society against people exercising the entrepreneurship function. On the demand side, I think that the civil society is becoming increasingly anti-entrepreneurship. The idea being that entrepreneurs are fostering their own nests, being greedy, producing inequality, going against equality and at odds with environmental development. And so I think there's a general sort of zeitgeist, if we might call it that's against entrepreneurship. And the final thing is that this paper and my whole attitude and view of entrepreneurship sees it as a function. It sees it as a function of decision-making under uncertainty, where people are challenged to make difficult decisions, because these decisions always are, and back it up with their own resources or their family's resources or resources that they borrowed and have to pay back. And this challenge is becoming greater as what we might call a VUCA in the world economy: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity increase. So there's a variety of arguments there, kind of from the supply side, the demand side, and general society, suggesting that the exercise of the entrepreneurial function is increasingly difficult.
Yeah, that's great, Professor Buckley. And in the article, you also identify several forces that seems to put pressure on entrepreneurship. And can you summarize a bit these forces and maybe which one of these mechanisms do you see as most influential, and also why?
Yeah. I think if we can look at this not from the supply and demand side now, but from sort of macro forces and micro forces. On the macro side, basically what an entrepreneur is doing, Schumpeter went back to this, made this very clear in terms of creative destruction. You're creating new things in the process of doing that. Other things are being pushed aside and being reduced in importance. And I think there's a general decline in the willingness to take these kind of risks. I mean, we can look at it from a societal point of view in terms of aging. People want security, they want insurance. Entrepreneurial risks are by definition non-insurable. So there's an aging population. And on the aging side, you can see the concern about taking risks. But when we look at young people, there's also amongst a lot of young people an anti-entrepreneurship attitude. This is regarded as being exploitative. It's regarded as pushing ahead. It's regarded as not being what society's all about, which is about welfare and taking care of people. I think also the sustainability argument can be used against entrepreneurship, saying you have to destroy things. This might mean involve some destruction of the environment. That might be a problem. And totally different argument on the macro side is the argument that vested interests work against entrepreneurship. I've written about this in other articles about the increasing prevalence of producer-driven society. In other words, people who have control of society preventing change except in their interest, increasing market concentration and incumbents. So I think you have a set of arguments that kind of interact there on the macro side that make entrepreneurship difficult to exercise. On the micro side, then you've got the issue of social norms. We've got the idea that an entrepreneur, somebody exercising entrepreneurial judgment, has to be something of an individualist. You have to go against the crowd. And where we have groupthink, much influenced by social media, one might argue, it's much more difficult for an individual to go against the group and innovate in that sense and try something new. So I think there's social pressures at the micro level on individuals. Entrepreneurship's also, to some extent, regarded as psychologically perverse. I mean, why would you be doing this? Why would you be taking risks? Why would you be entering what might be termed a danger zone? What about your work-life balance? What about your mental health? You know, this is damaging to your mental. So all these kinds of influences from family, from society are militating against entrepreneurship. And if we also put inequality very much up front and centre, then we might make a claim that what entrepreneurship is about excessive rewards. Now, you asked me how I would weight those arguments, and I think I would weight which are the most important. Depends what we really want to look at, what kind of lens we're looking at. Are we looking at individuals, in which case I would put the social media and social pressure very high? Or are we talking about the macro factors, where I would put the pressure against, the environmental pressure and the producer pressure against new entrepreneurs? So I think entrepreneurs, in short, and to use a short phrase, face an uphill battle, and the steepness of the hill is getting more steep both at individual and societal level, and that is my claim. That's the challenge of this article.
So if we can elaborate a bit more maybe on these societal attitudes. You also claim that that there is this trend that societal attitudes may be shifting in ways that tend to reduce support for entrepreneurial activity. And in these terms, what type of signs or indicators do you see or make you think of this secular decline?
Well, I think there are some general trends. I think there's a general trend in the decline of trust. And the decline of trust between individuals, I think, is very strong in a lot of societies. And we can come on to non-Western societies a little later. But there's an argument that there's a lack of trust, and a related argument around intersectionality, that I can only trust people who are like me, of the same gender and the same ethnicity and so on. And entrepreneurs have to work across those divides. One of the great features of entrepreneurship is it does pull people together when it's successful. Now, other evidence I would give, hard evidence, is barriers to migration, right? Increasing barriers to migration. What do we know about entrepreneurs? They tend to be more mobile, socially and geographically, locationally, and lots of other ways. Entrepreneurship depends on increasing mobility. And we have lots and lots of societies discouraging that kind of mobility. I would also argue that the disruption caused by trade wars and by protectionism is an inhibition to entrepreneurship. You could argue that you're only going to be restricted to your home market if you've got a small home market, or you're in niche products, or you're in a sensitive area, and more areas are being called security-driven areas, and we need to protect that techno-nationalism. All these trends that we're seeing with the rise of populism, if you like, and protectionism are, to me, also often anti-entrepreneurial trends. So we've got trends that I've highlighted that are from government, right? Government controls, and government increasing control over sections of the economy is going to inhibit entrepreneurship. We've got civil society pressure saying, this is going to damage your mental health, or you're stepping out of line, or this is not what we do in our group on social media. And we've got market pressures from increasing concentration. So what I've termed elsewhere the governance triangle of market, civil society, and government all put pressure, downward pressure, on the exercise of entrepreneurship. So I think I've talked almost entirely so far about Western society, but I think these are problematic at the very least, even if you don't go the whole way and say these are causing a secular decline. I think you have to admit that there are huge pressures against the exercise of the entrepreneurial function.
So you briefly mentioned already about this distinction between Western and non-Western society. What would be the difference on your argument on these two different levels? And is the argument completely related to Western societies, or could it also be applied to non-Western societies?
I think it is generally applicable. It's always awkward to try and generalize internationally, as I know better than most, I think. But I think there are strong indications that there are variants of this argument in non-Western societies as well. That some of the arguments that I've used, and people can go through them and see if they agree one by one. But one other issue is the outright prohibition and indeed jailing of successful entrepreneurs that we see in China. If you put your head above the parapet too much and you challenge party dominance in China, as an entrepreneur building your own company, you could be in severe trouble. And there are lots of, not everywhere that would apply to, but I'm sure we could all list societies where entrepreneurs are seen as a threat to the existing order. And indeed, entrepreneurs exactly are a threat to the existing order, because if they didn't change the existing order, they wouldn't be entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurship in itself is a challenge to authoritarian regimes. And this is another very sad factor of my analysis, if you believe it, that if entrepreneurship does become that much more difficult, then it is much more difficult to get societal change, because entrepreneurs are a major mover of society. Then we could argue, well, what about state-owned enterprise? Is entrepreneurship exercised in state-owned companies, state-owned enterprises? And I would argue, yes, it is. But I think state capitalism also has its problems because, again, entrepreneurs have to at least bear in mind that their ultimate owner, their ultimate controller is the state, and therefore it's much more difficult. So on the one side, we've got problems of affluent society that are inhibiting entrepreneurship. On the other side, we've got authoritarian societies that are interfering or causing a decline in entrepreneurship. So I would think that I have strong arguments for making the case in many societies, and thinking of exceptions might be an interesting exercise for anyone who buys the argument.
Yeah, that's great. And just as a final question about the article, before moving to some more general considerations, do you think that entrepreneurship is indeed declining, or could someone also argue that it's transforming into new forms instead of declining? You touch on this a bit in the article, but would you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think that there is. You can make that argument that it's not actually in decline. It's very difficult to measure, as we all know. That it's not in decline, but it's moving into new areas. And I would think that there are some new areas. One very positive new area, for instance, is space, is outer space, and the entrepreneurship that we see there. And I've written about that elsewhere. And I think there are many opportunities and many openings that perhaps, and we could argue this through, some of my arguments will not apply to as strongly because it's seen as going outside a new frontier, not necessarily damaging existing society and so on. And the other area, very different, very negative, is criminal entrepreneurship, is the exercise of decision-making under uncertainty, entrepreneurship, in criminal activities. And we know, and I've written about this as well, that criminal activity is increasing, and the black economy, if we can call it that, or the shadow economy, is growing. So there may be a case to be made that some entrepreneurs are kind of driven underground because of some of the problems that I've talked about of exercising what we might call legitimate entrepreneurship into criminal activity. And that's a very interesting area to look at, I think. Criminal activities are very interesting because they use different mechanisms. You can't use contracts, for instance. So it's very interesting possible extension of the argument.
So if we have to look ahead, what do you think would need to change, either economically or institutionally or even culturally, to sort of revive an entrepreneurial dynamisms in our society?
All of those things. The easy and the not easy, but the most obvious condition is to foster it through incentives. You can put some of my arguments in terms of, well, the incentives to entrepreneurship have declined relative to the costs. And one way of doing that is to reduce the tax burden on entrepreneurship and to reward decision-making under uncertainty, to reward risky decision-making. And the tax structure could be moved in that direction. Doesn't look very likely at the moment with current attitudes, but that's a possibility. Social attitudes definitely could be changed. I mean, there could be some movements and societies and general social movements that bring back the entrepreneur as hero. Because although I don't think it's a very good way of looking at entrepreneurs as heroes, because entrepreneurship's a function, not a characteristic of individual human beings. But I think that we have been through an era, and we're to some extent still in it, of seeing entrepreneurs as heroes. Richard Branson, Elon Musk, right? Okay, as heroes, people who take us forward. And they're often now portrayed as anti-heroes, the people who destroy the environment, people who create inequality, exploiters, and so on. So social discourse could change. Cultural attitudes, definitely. Do we have plays, films, television programs that portray entrepreneurs in a positive light? Generally, I would suggest no. Generally, the villains of the piece are entrepreneurs. Generally, the people who are trying to make a quick buck are caricatures of entrepreneurs who are portrayed as nasty, exploitative people rather than people who are trying to create new things. Cultural shift would be really important, possibly difficult to see. Do we have playwrights who are going to write plays about heroic entrepreneurs? Victorian society did it. Could we do it again? Would that be a way forward? So all of those things. And I think from your question, you will have seen the range of the issues that I'm trying to suggest have led to this issue of secular decline that I am proposing.
So that's great. I think it's a great insight from this conversation. And just as a final question, Professor Buckley, if there is one message you would like our viewers to remember from this article, what would it be?
I think I would take a rather prosaic message, and I would suggest that when we look at entrepreneurship and we look at small business in general, we would look at the issues of decision-making, risky decision-making, what that implies, and think that through. Think through the cost to the individual and the issues that are faced in trying in an increasingly regulated and hostile society about the exercise of entrepreneurship. And I would also ask people to think, what would societies look like if we continue in this route and if we continue to dampen down entrepreneurial spirit, if I could put it that way, even though that's not particularly the way I look at it. As you know, I look at it as a function. And I think a function like if I could use an awful analogy, like a fragile plant needs care. And we've not been giving it care. We've been trampling down the plant, in my view. And this is a challenge. This is not everybody's going to agree with me. I know that in seminars, some people have thrown rocks at me and said all sorts of things that this can't be true and so on. But look at the argument and evaluate it and see if there is anything in it or where we can say, no, that is not the case. And point to position either societies or sections of society or areas where we are positively encouraging entrepreneurship. One example might be space, right? That might be somewhere where people think, yeah, let's go for it. Let's have entrepreneurial activity. In certain other areas where we could equally benefit, my view is that is much more difficult than it used to be.
So, Professor Buckley, thank you very much for this insightful conversation and for sharing your perspective on these important trends in entrepreneurship.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
So for those watching, if you enjoyed this interview, please subscribe to the Small Business Economics Journal channel for more conversations with authors and researchers. So thanks again for watching and see you in the next episode.